And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which I thank you for. Podcast is Leveraging Thought Leadership, and my guest today is Naphtali Hoff. And Naphtali's an interesting fellow. He's written a bunch of books. He is an executive coach. He's a consultant. He does a lot of work focused on the nonprofit space. Um, what else can we say? He's been in education. He's been in leadership. Let's just sort of dive right in. So welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Peter, it's fantastic to be with you today.
Ah, my pleasure. Um, so let's start here. So why don't we start with the transition that you made from something else to this? Meaning, right? How did you sort of wake up one day and find yourself in this world of content and thought leadership, and this is how you make a living, and this is what you do all day? How did
That
that
is a great question. I ask myself that all the time. What happened was about 5 years ago, I was at the time a school leader down in Atlanta, independent school, 360 kids, K through 8. And I had been in education for, I would say, upwards of 15 years at that point, both as a classroom teacher and as a school leader. And I just decided, for a variety of reasons, that school leadership wasn't going to be my path moving forward. As much as I loved the core work, there were a lot of ancillary pieces that maybe didn't jive with me just the way that I wanted. And frankly, I wanted to make a bigger impact. And I had noticed in my own work with coaches and consultants that they really made a huge impact in my work, the way that I thought about things. And I said, couldn't I just do the same thing? And so I started really thinking about it. I don't know that I went about it exactly in the right way, but I know that I wanted to get there, and I've been working slowly and steadily towards that goal ever since, and it's been a fantastic ride.
Well, let's start with the right way because in many careers, there's the right way, right? If you want to be an attorney, you typically study, political sci or something undergrad, go to law school, study for the bar, etc. You want to be a doctor, there's a path. So in many careers, there's a linear path. Not so much in this space.
Not at all. And the naive part of me is that I thought that if I go ahead and hang my shingle, if I put together my website and I let some people know that I'm out there doing this work, that it's just going to rain for me. But that was so naive and really not the way to go. And I think
We call
retroactively,
that the field of dream strategy, right?
the field of dream strategy, I think you should trademark that. That's fantastic. But I think that, in my case, what I probably could and should have been doing is giving myself the benefit of some more runway. So
Hmm.
that when I go into this process, number one, people understand who I am. They understand the value add that I can bring. I've already started to build relationships specific to the coaching and consulting work that I do, so that when people are thinking about it, they're already starting to think about me. My social media presence was almost nil. I had a LinkedIn account. I had nothing going on Facebook and Twitter. And part of that has to do with the fact, just in full disclosure, that as an Orthodox Jew, in my community, it wasn't necessarily seen as the most, not that many don't, many do, but I'm just saying that it wasn't necessarily seen as the place to be putting yourself out, so to speak. So
So let me separate for a
I really wasn't
second.
active there. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, let me separate church and state, but we'll say shul and state in this instance, between the content and then the marketing exposure and all that. So you immediately went to, well, here's what I don't think I did right in terms of marketing, runway, whatever. I want to go backwards on that and give yourself some credit, meaning I'm assuming what you did do right is what most people do is go really deep into the content and the methodologies and the frameworks and the how you can help people. Is that a fair statement?
It is very fair. I write significantly and regularly. I got my blog going. I was writing for Huffington Post and Smart Brief, and I still have relationships with them, Success.com and others. So I was getting my content out there regularly and posting on social media and building my networks. So all of that was happening. I was also working behind the scenes to really build my credibility. In other words, my own inner sense of efficacy. Can I really do what I claim I can do? Do I have the coaching tools that I need? Do I have the confidence that I can deliver so that when I'm having a conversation with a client, I want it to come through not only in word, but in vibe. You know what I mean? In the nonverbals, in the tone that really
Well, the
indicates
brand, the
that
look,
I
the
can.
feel, the energy, and all that.
Everything. Yeah. And I think that that took some time as well because you need to be able to build your own inner confidence that you can do this. And so when I talked earlier about maybe not starting exactly in the right way, I know there are people, for example, who coach and consult and they begin through a firm. They begin with some type of other existing framework where they can just go in, observe others, intern, become mentored, and get their feet wet. And I was trying, number one, to pivot to on a new career path in a new community, and do so where I was taking existing skills, but not exactly fully aligned with what I did in the past, and leverage them to a new pathway moving forward. So there was a lot working against me, and thankfully I've been able to work around that. But those are certain challenges, definite challenges I think folks need to, be mindful of as they're thinking about
So the
this.
key thing I'm taking away from there, correct me if I'm misreading the tea leaves, is obviously the table stakes is getting your content in order and making sure you provide value to others and knowing how you're going to serve them. But don't neglect the marketing piece of this. Where how are people going to find me in social media and lead generation and all this sort of stuff that might not come naturally to various thought leaders coming from different places, but you got to crack that code because without clients, you tend not to eat, right? Is that a fair?
You are spot on. Yeah, that's exactly it. And if that to me is my biggest learning aha moment, if you will, even though it wasn't a single moment. But the greatest takeaway from all of this is that you really need all of the supporting components so that people know who you are. And if I could add one thing, Peter, what I was trying to do is throw so many darts at the dartboard and hoping that they're going to stick in terms of different messages and different ideas. It took some time for me to really identify who am I trying to serve and how specifically am I trying to serve them. And I have a feeling that many people listening to this conversation have tremendous talent, have lots that they can share, are knowledgeable in so many areas. And the problem is that if you try to go, and you know this because this is what you do, I think, for a living, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what so many people struggle with because ultimately they're thinking, well, why should I limit myself to this when I can make such a bigger impact? The problem is that if you go so wide, you ultimately lose
And
out.
you're 100% right because the limiting actually increases your probability of success. So, for example, you've got content, whatever it is, right? And then you say, oh man, this, everybody could benefit from this. Everybody could benefit from my leadership model or my development model or my whatever. And the reality is, unless you're Coca Cola or some, $100 billion brand, you can't afford to market to everybody. And everybody is marketing to everybody. So the differentiation and the niching and the specialization is key because, in my opinion, we live in the age of the long tail. I could find everybody. I just can't afford to market to them, right? When I get down to a niche of whatever that niche might be, and so in your case, maybe senior leadership in nonprofits, right? Then you can find them, and you can find them, and you can speak to them with a level of specificity and a level of customization that really resonates at a higher level. So, how did you? What were the experiments that you went through to find your niche? Because I'm assuming you didn't necessarily hit it out of the park the first time.
Yeah, that's a great question. There was some trial and error involved, and I think that invariably because of my background, because of some of the language that I used, even for example in my book, Becoming the New Boss, which was written for new leaders of all stripes. It wasn't specifically for nonprofit or small business or corporate or anyone else. Nonetheless, the examples that I use, the personal examples, the anecdotes, the experiences, are all coming from, my little sliver of the universe, which is coming the pathway of school leadership. So any of that kind of messaging, I think invariably, and besides, what ultimately feels most comfortable when I get up and I talk to an audience, there's something for me naturally when I get up and I talk to school leaders that's just different than when I talk to any other group. As much as I love talking to all groups, but there's a certain kinship and connection. So I feel it in my own bones, so to speak, and I know that others feel it when they hear me, communicate. But I did work, and just to answer your question specifically, I did work with one individual to help me really, refine my
Great,
message.
great. But there's also knowing sort of what your tribe is. There's a reciprocal sort of connection, gravitas, and credibility because they look at you. If you got in front of a group of I don't know, whatever IT leaders that you have no experience in, they're going to look at you and not that they're going to be disrespectful, but there's a level of skepticism, probably rightfully so. Who is this guy and why does he have the right to tell us anything in the space that you're in?
Correct.
Who is this guy? Check, check, check. You've been there, done that. And why should I listen to him again? Check, check, check. So you're coming in at a place of credibility that is an easier place for you to win and for your audience to connect with. So it's been 5 years, which hasn't been all that long in this space, and you've done lots of different things from publishing books to blogging, etc. Tell me about let's talk about sort of your content creation and publishing strategy. How do you choose what to write and where to put it?
That's a great question. I need to be, in all honesty, a little bit more strategic, probably, but most of my focus is in one of two areas. I focus primarily on leadership, and with a secondary focus on education, because again, that's still my sort of my my background and whatnot. I post regularly for SmartBrief. I'm a regular contributor for them. I publish for them monthly. Other publications a little bit less frequently, and I publish on my blog at least once a week.
Let me ask you specifically about SmartBrief for a second,
Go
because
ahead.
I'm curious about this. So I talk to people all the time, and they say I write for SmartBrief or Forbes or HuffPo,
Hmm.
and I would say, okay, well, how's that working out for you? Meaning, how do you measure success beyond views, reach, et cetera? Do you have a good sense of, what I invest, whatever, 10 hours a month in writing for SmartBrief, and I know that it works for me because I got, whatever, X number of clients in the last 2 years from that. Are you able to?
Sure. So the answer is I can't tell you in terms of client generation specifically, but I can tell you in terms of traction other ways. Number one, my Twitter feed lights up when I have that content. Number two, I find that many of the download offerings that I make available, including my Epic ebook for understaffed leaders, all of a sudden I notice a flurry of activity. So I know when I'm getting things pushed out further, people are looking at my bio and they're responding. And in addition to that, I can repurpose that content for my own blog, for other publications. So I see it as starting with SmartBrief, but it certainly doesn't end there. And actually, I'll mention this because I think that this is useful for people listening. My book was, I would say, upwards of 80% created out of my blog posts. So I
Ah.
wrote them as individual blogs. I saw the continuity. Where could I piece it together? What were the gaps? I wrote more blog posts to fill in those gaps, and ultimately, I had a book.
So I love that. So there's two ways to write a book, sort of linear and forensic, if you will, right? So I love the fact that from an efficiency perspective, you're putting out a bunch of blogs. And by the way, one of the beauties of blogs is, to me, if you think of them as a series of experiments, you come up with an idea, you throw it out there, it's not a ton of energy. And sometimes you're surprised at what resonates, right? Sometimes you think, wow, that was the greatest thing I ever wrote, and that's going to rock it. And silence. And then there's another one you're like, yeah, no, if I should even hit send on this, and that's the one that gets the interaction.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that the publisher that I work with over at SmartBrief writes a post at the end of each year where he lists the top 10 viewed or top 10 engaged with content that he's had on his site. And I've been fortunate each year that I've been writing for them to have at least one post there. And sometimes it's not the one that I would have predicted, but nonetheless it is there. And the fact that people are responding to it means that the general direction that I'm working in is something people feel good with.
Well, and the fact that it's not one that you predicted gives you great insight and feedback, right? Because I would imagine that says, oh, if people want that, I can give them more of that.
Oh, sure.
Great. And then when you put the book together, sort of, forensically, hey, I've got 100 blog posts and I could, there's some gaps I need to fill. The energy that it takes to write a book that way versus dedicating your life to 60,000 words is a lot higher, and in some levels a lot riskier because none of that content's been tested in the marketplace.
Yeah, it is a lot higher, but the main thing for me was to get the book done. I felt that that would give me credibility. I've had speaking engagements around the book, so I think there's a lot of opportunity once you get it going.
So if someone's sitting there now and they're in a similar situation to you, they're blogging, they've got their niche, they've got their expertise, they're thinking about writing a book, what other things would you recommend that they consider?
Well, I think there's a lot of pieces they have to think about. Who's their target market, like you said, and who do they really want to deliver their message to, and all along have that avatar in mind. So that when you're writing your content, you're really directing it very clearly. Recently I submitted some sample chapters for a different book project, and I used some of my existing content, even though this was much more for a niche audience. And the feedback that I got, amongst other things, was, it sounds like you're speaking to leaders in general, but you're not speaking to our leaders. And I think that that's an important piece in terms of your messaging. That's number one. And number two, I think it's really critical. Block out time. Don't put it on a to do list. but literally go into your calendar and every day, let's say it's 8 o'clock in the morning and you want to work on it for an hour, you can afford 8 to 9. Whenever your sweet spot is, number one, find a time when you're mentally clear, you're not being distracted by other things, and you put it on your calendar as an actual appointment with yourself that you're sitting down and you're writing and you set goals around that. That's a critical piece.
Well, and I think that's great because if you put it on your to-do list, it gets carried over to next, tomorrow's or next week's. When you block that time out as if it was a commitment, which it is, to an other, but to yourself, I'm gonna, 1 to 3 in the afternoon or 7 to 9 in the morning or whatever it is, it gets treated as something that needs to be done and will be done if you get into that sort of mindset.
I learned that through a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, and I think that that's a fantastic resource for anyone in this audience because I have a feeling that there's a lot of people here who really, really benefit from the ability to go deep. Sometimes we get distracted. We want to be present everywhere and this and that. But if you're a thought leader, you've got something really concrete, deep, and meaningful to share. And you can't be doing that with little ancillary, kind of like a blip here, a blip there. You have to have time where you can really develop your ideas and develop your methodology so that people can really benefit from your wisdom.
I love that because it's really the leadership side of thought leadership where, it's one thing if you're pithy or coming up with comments or a sharp tweet or something like that, but it's the leadership side, meaning that you're adding to the conversation in a thoughtful way and moving whatever space that you're in a different direction, right? Or having a perspective and being able to share that. Let me sort of pivot a little bit here to spend a lot of time on the content and finding clients. How did someone like you that came from a different world, right? Education, figure out the whole what am I worth, the whole value pricing compensation? I'm assuming in the education space, you negotiate your salary and then that's done and then on it goes. How did you figure that one out?
Well, I did a lot of market research. I was exposed to the concept because I had engaged coaches and consultants as well. So I knew, of an existing market. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that I was pricing myself based on value, not based on hours or other considerations. And I do a lot of listening, a lot of reading. Audible is my best friend. I'm on the audiobooks all the time. And I'm learning more and more, whether it's Michael Porter or others, that you really need to think about what is your value add on a variety of levels. And once you start there, you're in a much better position to determine something and then to sell it in a way that people feel that they're willing to invest in it.
And did you make the mistake early on of giving work away at a price that you clearly wouldn't do today, undervaluing and not having the confidence to say this is what I am worth and those are my fees?
Yeah, I mean, my fees have definitely gone up over the years, without
Great.
question. But even now, Peter, I'll be honest with you. There are times where I have this inner voice and inner discussion. How much am I giving away, for example, on my website? When I want to do a taster session, or perhaps now what I really do is a deep dive session so that people can truly appreciate my coaching, to what degree, what is my red rope policy? Who am I inviting in? Who am I keeping out of that conversation? Those are some areas I still grapple with a little bit, and I'm working towards resolution. But I think that that's an ongoing process, and I think fee adjustments are going to be continuous for people as they continue to grow in their space and they demonstrate the value that they can add.
Well, that's great. There's so much great wisdom today. I think as we start to wrap up here, based on your journey, if you could suggest to folks maybe one or two things to not do or to do less of, and one or two things they should consider doing more of to continue down the path of monetizing and being in the business side of on the business side of content and thought leadership.
Sure. So some great advice that I heard, a book called The Prosperous Coach, and the person who actually articulates it is Steve Chandler. They're two authors of the book. Rich Litvin is the other. But Steve talks about how when you make your to-do list, when you have your set of items that you want to accomplish, go through them and identify which are the ones that you can monetize, which are the ones that could really add value, and which are the ones that maybe not so. So for example, to me, a blog post in general is not a monetizable item in and of itself. It may add value in other ways, but that's not the same. And so if I have to choose between that and some other activity, engaging with a potential new client or something different along those lines, I'm going to choose that thing that could ultimately be monetized. And I think we sometimes feel like, well, I gotta post my blog on Monday, and I've got to post my podcast on Wednesday, and all of this, and we get locked in that, and we lose sight of the fact that there's some things that really ultimately going to drive our business.
Great point. So this has been a lot of fun. How do folks find you? So how do we get in touch with you? If someone wants to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Best way is through my website, impactfulcoaching.com. You could sign up for my blog, for my podcast, get my contact information. Lots there. I certainly would encourage you to visit.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your candor, and I appreciate you sharing with us your journey, your success, a couple of skinned knees, and some great wisdom along the way. So thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Peter. It's been really, really great. I've enjoyed it very much.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.